So, hi everyone. I'm here with Kyle Chadderton. He's in business development for ConnexOne. So, Kyle, thanks very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
So, ConnexOne is sort of in the contact center helping customers with contact and contact center infrastructure. I mean, how have you sort of found, I suppose, the business infrastructure the last couple of years, particularly with the pandemic, etc., in terms of like moving towards this sort of more sort of like virtual kind of environment? I mean, what have been the impacts on you guys?
I mean, if you sort of break that down into two parts of the question, so how the last couple of years have been, and then how the business environment has been. I mean, I'd say firstly, it's been tough, but it's been rewarding. I'd say it's hard to pinpoint it as 2 years as well as a whole, because of the peaks and troughs and changes within that time. So I think if you look at the very start of the pandemic, it's all known that the business world was thrown into the unknown. We were all entering a period of time that we didn't understand.
And I suppose, how are you finding the impact of remote working? And I suppose, because we all went out to sort of work remotely, I mean, how are you seeing sort of the legacy of that coming through? Because I think sort of like pre-pandemic, we were definitely all in the office, particularly in the contact center. There was a sort of real sort of like, you move in the office, or you basically had digital processes that were sort of self-serve in the background. But now we seem to be in this sort of like hybrid space. We've got some people still out sort of working remotely. Some people are coming back, some people aren't, those kind of things. I mean, has that fundamentally changed the dynamics, do you think, of the call center or the contact center, but then also the technology needed as well?
So I'd say hybrid working has definitely changed the way in which businesses and companies attract their employees. I mean, in terms of the switch, the pandemic has sort of caused people to have a forced trial run, if you will, of remote working, and it's sort of providing individuals with the flexibility and technology which globalization has provided, which means that sort of hybrid working has essentially meant that the Dolly Parton 9 to 5 life, if you will, it's not applicable for a working mum who needs to pick her kids up from school, or someone who spends 2 hours a day stuck in gridlock 5 times a week. It's meant that people can be more productive by making their work fit around their lives, rather than having a big block of your day which says 9 till 5, you're in the office, you have to be in here. You can now be in, and you can base your life around your life, if you will. It's not a life. Your life isn't based around work anymore, and as long as you're still succeeding in producing results, then the hybrid working model is something that's only going to continue to grow. I mean, personally, I like a mix. I think it's important not to lose office culture, and I think a lot of people, myself included, while it was strictly work from home, I missed the human interaction.
And I suppose, what are you seeing from your clients in terms of, I suppose, the impact of that in terms of the type of technical tools they need to have, from a contact center point of view? I mean, has it fundamentally changed in terms of like the type of services they kind of need now?
I'd say undoubtedly there's been fundamental changes in the way that clients are now communicating with their customers. Obviously, the way society communicates has changed as a whole. So people if you go back I don't know, 50, 60 years, people text each other now rather than writing letters, and there are far more ways of communicating now than there ever has been. So clever businesses aren't going to drag their feet and fall behind. They're going to stay ahead of the pace, which is why there's been a huge shift towards Omni-Channel rather than a scattered multi-channel approach. There's been a huge shift towards Omni-Channel rather than a scattered multi-channel approach. So having Omni-Channel allows businesses to communicate with people in a way that is best tailored to the customer, which essentially maximizes their chances of achieving their objectives. So hypothetically, if a business is trying to reach someone about, I don't know, say a new offer that they are running, or track them down for a bad debt. In the past, they would have had to keep trying to ring them, maybe send a scattered email or two, or a letter with a an omni-channel system. Businesses can ring people, they can WhatsApp people, they can speak to them on social media, they can email them, and it's all through one connected, integrated system. So the employees, the staff and the agents can see all of their previous interactions. So if someone leaves a business, or if an agent goes on annual leave and they are speaking to a certain customer or chasing a certain person down, then that case will become someone else's priority. And guess what? All with all the previous interaction history stored across multiple mediums at the click of a button in one centralized system, it's very easy and transparent for the person that is taking over that case to be able to have a full history and an understanding of where that case is up to.
And are you seeing like certain channels that are being more effective than others, or is it it's really the combination that's sort of that's important?
I think you've got to look at demographics with that. So I think you need to look at, I think age is personally a big one. So
be careful what you say now.
Well, I mean, typically if you look at data though, typically if you look at data though, the younger generations tend to prefer, how do I put this, a less direct approach almost. So younger generations will tend to prefer a WhatsApp or a live chat, whereas maybe some of the older generations, they tend to prefer human interaction. So they tend to prefer speaking to a person and having that human voice to speak to, which you tend to then, with a system like ours or like omni-channel systems in general, you can pull reports and data to supplement certain communication methods that tend to work best with certain demographics. So if you're running a campaign for, say, life insurance or for like wills and stuff like that, you'd maybe tend to focus it more on mobile phone. Whereas if you're maybe running a campaign for so young person's thing to buy, hypothetically car insurance, so this is a very broad example, but maybe you tailor that more towards email or more 21st century modes of communication. And I think industries as well, going back to that, say debt collection, I'd say has a much more successful contact rate and success rate over the phone. It doesn't matter what the age is there, it just tends to be a case. Whereas if you was to look at something like retail, then live chat and emails are far more successful, and WhatsApps are far more successful than belling people up all the time.
I suppose one of the challenges of having lots of different channels is then how do you orchestrate them, right? So it's kind of like, what do you do first? Which one's more effective? What's the combination of the different channels that is most effective in terms of, I suppose, reaching the outcome, which, in my world is good outcomes for customers, or it might be, reaching resolution of disputes or something like that. I mean, what are some of the orchestration challenges? Because it feels like the omni-channel world adds a layer of complexity, right? So it's great from a customer-centric point of view, but it also adds a layer of complexity in terms of getting hold of people and orchestrating everything. What are some of the challenges you see around that, and how do you approach it?
I think that boils down to your reporting and your data. So I think if you have a system which is integrated to CRMs, I think that's a big thing. If you've integrated with a CRM, then you have customer data. You can pull reports which will simplify which areas prefer which channels of communication, and also having that omni-channel system, how you said it complicates it. I disagree, and I'd say it's the opposite, because you can look at a customer and a client and see how they have been communicated with previously across multiple mediums. Then it's quite simple to see that if you've tried ringing someone 10 times and they haven't picked up the phone 10 times, why would you ring them an 11th time? But I think at that point you would look to switch to a WhatsApp or to an email, and you'd keep trying across the different mediums rather than keep trying the one way, which in the past and with a system that doesn't provide a layer of interaction history, you would continue to do.
Are you seeing contact centers growing, or do you think they're sort of like changing because different channels have different cost profiles, right? So, for example, if you're WhatsApp, there's certain amount of that you can automate as well. You can have, you know, chat bots or those kind of things. You can take some of the cost out, but there's also then still a need to have real people sometimes as well, dealing with much more sort of complex issues. I mean, sort of how are you sort of seeing that dynamic changing, and are you seeing contact centers growing or shrinking or changing? How are you seeing them change?
I'd say there's been more of a move towards digital. So there is no doubt that the voice element of contact centers is on the decline. I mean, you just have to look at the statistics and the data out there to see that. However, the industry continues to evolve, and I'd say to a more self-serve model, if you will. So this is something which has been accelerated by the continued growth of digital, and something which I personally and customers are a big fan of. So to stay ahead of the competition and to reduce your costs and to ensure that contact centers don't go out of business, it's essential that you've detailed a comprehensive IVR and workflow. So directing people to websites for filling in personal details rather than wasting agent time over the phone is much quicker for the customer and keeps agents available for more pressing matters. With waiting in a queue on hold for ages, I mean, we've all done it. It's very annoying. So some of the hold music you hear is 10-person people in turn. So providing people with an option to be called back when someone becomes available is much better for the customer, and it's much better for the business reputation than having someone waiting for half an hour on hold. If you've got a system that can trigger a callback when an agent becomes available, that's much better for customers. So because of self-serve, staff don't have to be a jack of all trades, if you will, which perhaps they previously would be. So when it comes to the customer, the business can allow them to become, the agents to become specialists in certain areas, which allows customers to have better outcomes, more positive outcomes. So positive outcomes, you could then trigger your workflow perhaps to send a quick CSAT review by text, because you know that because of the specialism of the agent dealing with it due to the workflow, the outcome is more likely to be positive than negative. If you trigger a quick CSAT by your system, then you're enhancing your data, you're enhancing your reputation, and it's just a click of a button. It's not a mundane process, which perhaps it previously would be. So the move towards digital is ultimately, like I said, it is reducing the role of voice in contact centers, but it's allowing the voice element of contact centers to become much more efficient and effective. So all the other bells and whistles that you can build in a workflow, businesses can now create a better customer experience whilst having the flexibility to keep changing and keep up with modern trends.
I mean, what does it mean for the call center agent or the advisor on the phone? I mean, does it mean they're going to have a richer work life because they're going to get more complex or more complexity or more engaging type of conversations?
I think going back, it just allows them to become more specialist in certain areas. So if you're, which ultimately for an agent as well will then allow them to maybe move on to better things within their careers. So if you're, say 10 years ago, and you're working in a call center, let's take a bank, for example, and you're perhaps expected to understand, okay, so your role might tailor taking all the details of people. It might take credit cards, it might take loans, all the different bells and whistles of a bank. Whereas with the acceleration of digital and IVRs and workflows, it allows people to become far more specialist in certain areas, which if you're then becoming a specialist in a certain area, it builds your knowledge within that area, but it also opens doors for you to then move on to maybe, so let's say, I don't know, that you're part of the credit team in a bank and you are responsible for dealing with repayments. You can become a proper specialist in that area, and then that will allow you to become so knowledgeable that you can then move on to maybe management or maybe another role, like own a credit business or something like that. I think it enriches the agent, and also you're not going to get as many bad calls, if you know what I mean. You're not going to get as many angry people down the phone because you're going to be in a far better position to help them achieve what it is that they're looking to achieve.
I mean, I don't know what you find, but one of the things that frustrates me is whenever I call up a call center or a contact center on the voice, it's like every single time, no matter what time I call, they seem to be having unusually high volume and unusually on hold for like 40, 50 minutes. So it does seem like there's a huge opportunity to almost like take some of that volume out there. And usually I would call in if I haven't been able to do something online. And so there's a requirement to call in. So it feels like there's an opportunity there to put that automation in place or to try and take that out. I mean, do you think we've done enough of that in the industry to really look at that? Because it feels like maybe the opportunity to get better service levels is to push in the automation and the
I'd agree completely. I think this spotlight boils down to which businesses are staying ahead of the game. I think businesses who have adapted this change and automated the systems to be much more or less on hold friendly, if you will, reducing the wait times is imperative. And I think businesses who have created workflows and businesses who have the different methods of communication, such as chatbots, and basically creating a way in which where the agent is the last resort, that becomes, then businesses are the ones that are thriving, ones where you're on hold for a long time. So maybe, for example, I find sometimes, for example, my main one would be the doctors. Whenever I try ringing the doctors, it's on hold for a long time. And obviously, because that's public sector, it doesn't have the same business needs, but from a personal perspective, it could certainly grow. And certainly, I think businesses who have automated are in a far stronger position to achieve more growth.
What do you think the main barrier is to doing the automation, taking that volume out to improve service level, right? So if you automate the process, you improve service level. But what's the barrier? Why are you seeing that clients maybe don't get to it? So when you come into a business, how do they leverage that opportunity?
I'd say sometimes it's the fear of the unknown. I think sometimes people, it goes back to one of my earlier points, that the businesses that stay ahead of the game are the businesses that will continue to thrive and stay ahead of the competitors are the ones that keep ahead of the game in terms of technology. And I think when you have sometimes businesses who have done things in a certain way for so many years and had success with it, trying to get them marginal gains is something, by getting them marginal gains, but also having to change something which has been working for so many years, they kind of look at it as a risk and reward, and they maybe don't see the advantage in it. And I think it also ultimately boils down to human beings and mindset in terms of how much do you want this change, and also how much do you need this change. I mean, what drives a person and what drives a business to feel like they need this change? And sometimes if something's working, rather than maybe switching to make it work better, they see it as, well, why would I change it when it's working, even though they could gain more? It's the risk and reward.
I mean, one of the things we chatted about before is software as a service, and I know that you guys you run a SaaS platform, but I suppose just talk a little bit about, I suppose, the importance of SaaS models and how they've grown, but then also the whole piece around sort of user configurability seems like that's a bit of a theme coming up, and I think you've probably seen some of the same with that.
Well, I'd say the lift in popularity and in SaaS is largely driven by the speed of implementation. So this evolution will continue, and it will boil down to what I like to call, when I'm on a call to clients, the slow death of on-prem. So WebRTC has meant that call centers have allowed the growth of flexible working. They've allowed businesses to plug business critical software from a browser and a headset, as opposed to having to be in a certain place at a certain time. And I think having that ability to be able to plug into your business and your infrastructure at the click of a button from anywhere, as opposed to having big clunky equipment that you have to be on site using, is imperative to business growth, and that's only going to continue. And SaaS, software as a service, it's the future. As cringy as that sounds, it's why would you have physical equipment when you can have something that you can pay for monthly, and you can have more competitiveness in the market. You've got the ability to be competitive with a SaaS model and provide a better service is more critical as well, because it's so simple to just, it's the click of a button to switch. It's the click of a button to change provider. It's rolling monthly contracts, things like that, as opposed to signing a 3-year contract where someone's going to have to come and it literally build systems in and around your area. So yeah, I think
this theme of user configurability seems like that's been a bit of a growing theme the last couple of years, which is sort of like the cost of change. Even when you've got a system, talk about an on-prem system, you'd have the engineers come in, they'd sort of make the change, and it's sort of that cost, there'd be a change cost associated with that. It does feel like there's a suite of systems that are sort of saying, well, look, you can configure this yourselves. You're much more in control than you ever were before. And it's almost like that seems like a cost that's also almost like getting taken out of the business as well as part of the SaaS model.
Yeah, well, I think having the ability, so like you said, the way in which engineers would previously come in and they would sort of set it all up, and it would be far more, right, this is the system, this is how it works. Having that ability, which we provide, and I know a number of other competitors provide, where you can have a session where we call them technical specifications, where you will quite literally spend time. So we provide, obviously, as we said previously, an omni-channel platform. So like, you know, that it's what it's centered around. It's centered around voice, it's centered around communication methods, but you can tailor that system then so that it's best suited to your agent and best suited to how your business is going to want to operate. So going back to self-serve and building workflows, being able to configure your system to say, so for example, we have clients across multiple industries. So if you're public sector, being able to build a workflow that maybe will take you to a payment system to pay your council tax. If you're a retail business, it can take you to you can build it so it will take you to a system for a customer service review and things like that. And being able to apply that bespoke model is critical to personalizing business critical software.
The configurability, I think, is kind of interesting in terms of like being able to respond to it, I suppose, and and sort of taking that cost out. So I suppose one of the things I wanted to chat a little bit about is, obviously we've seen a huge amount of change over the last couple of years, and now we're seeing even more conflict, in Europe, and we're seeing a sort of conflict. And I suppose, how should we start thinking about BCP, I suppose, just in terms of reacting to maybe future changes? Because I think COVID sort of took us as a bit of a shock.
Yeah, so I think one thing I would like to touch on with this, I think it's important to look at failover and geo-redundancy. So setting up instances where your data can be, if, say, for example, so we use AWS as our source of data center. So as AWS London goes down, having that failover to just switch it to AWS Dublin, it limits the implications. And I think it's important to ensure that businesses, because of the cloud and because it's maybe, so how we talked about on-prem, if it goes down, it's not a man, that's sexist. Somebody comes and fixes it, and it's a physical fix. Because it's in the cloud, it's imperative to ensure that your business is in a position to run as smoothly as possible 24/7.
I kind of agree. And I suppose we just have to start thinking about those things maybe that we didn't think about before. And I think one of the things that the pandemic sort of made us think about was you might have unforeseen shocks that you've got to sort of prepare for.
Definitely. I mean, the pandemic has transformed the way that business operates. There's no denying it. And having a plan in place for if we have to work from home, if your client's data becomes, if it's not retrievable, being able to just switch that over and being able to, ensure that if you're thrown in a situation where you can't come into the office, or you're thrown into a situation where, unfortunately, maybe data centers in Ukraine will have been attacked, you need to be in a position where that data or your business operations can be quickly adapted to fit the situation.
And to going back to, I suppose, just remote working, hybrid working, and we talked a little bit about sort of, I suppose, keeping morale up and those kind of things, as sort of being sort of stuck at home. I mean, what are some of the things that you're looking at, or you kind of feel really, I suppose, in terms of like, how do you keep morale up and how do you keep that interconnection kind of going? What's your kind of view on that? Is it one day back in the office? Is it flexi time? Is it sort of a couple of days a week? Is it one day a month? What are some of the infrastructures that you've seen being put in?
So I mean, personally, I think that having hybrid working is going to remain, and it should be encouraged. I mean, going back to the earlier point about how attracting employees has evolved, hybrid working becomes essential. So it ties very heavily in with the question in terms of ensuring that people have flexibility with their lives, and especially for those who have young children or long commutes. I think they're the two things that stick out for me in terms of the hybrid working. From a personal perspective, I think it is crucial to ensure that there remains an element of office life, or even if it is just for one day a week, human interaction is pivotal, and it's not something that can be replicated on Zooms or Zooms. It's not something that can be replicated on Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, things like that. So I think in terms of maintaining morale and quality control, if you will, that boils down to the quality of management and also the quality of the technology that you have to support your staff. So contact centers and companies that have heavy communication requirements for their staff, they could really thrive with modules that we have in our system. One that sticks out is called gamification, which essentially is an incentivification module. So if you make a certain amount of calls, if you have a certain wrap time, you can build up points and ensure that you have sort of, they can win rewards and vouchers, things like that. You can going back to the configuration, you can configure all of that around your business and how that best works for you. And I think also just little things, like going back to the management thing, having a good manager, especially when you're working from home or hybrid working, ensuring that motivation is there while you're not in the office seeing someone. It's hard. I have a lot of respect for the good managers out there, and having the right manager to encourage that productivity and ensuring that people thrive is critical. And that's the two things I would say in terms of that. I think having maybe technology that supplements morale and supplements working from home, and the human element is good management.
Do you know, I find almost like just sometimes it's just the change of scene. So like you sort of sit in your office and you sort of like, you're there all the time and you've been there for maybe now nearly 3 years now. And it's just that change of scene, just being in the office. And even if you're not in like loads of meetings, just allows you to concentrate differently. It's a bit like going to work from the library or going to work from a coffee shop or whatever it is. It just breaks your concentration, allows you to concentrate in a different way, maybe.
100%. I mean, like I said before, I think one of the things I personally struggled with in COVID was sort of finishing work, and then you know how you'd have your commute in to and then you'd get home and it's almost like you'd reset when you get home, and it's like, right, this is my chill time now. During COVID, I really struggled personally with the concepts of like finishing work and then sort of looking around and being like, all right, I'm still here.
Well, I used to commute to the kitchen.
Yeah, well,
to the kitchen.
I think it does get important to have a clear split between what's your workspace and what's sort of, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was in a house share, and so I didn't have the option to sort of work from another room other than my bedroom. I mean, now I've got my own flat, it's very different. I work from the spare room and then commute, so it's a lot better. But yeah, and I think what another thing I noticed with Zoom and Teams and stuff, when you're doing these big meetings, when you're on the phone with people, obviously sometimes you'll have 20 people on there, and it's very mechanical in terms of only one person can speak at once. if you're in an office, there can be 3 or 4 different conversations going on. You don't have to like tailor it to just one person speaking, and don't have to worry about people speaking over each other. And it's just that human interaction. It boils down to human interaction.
But don't you find Teams and Zoom are quite interesting? It's almost like you have to really sort of be on all the time. So if you're in a big meeting, actually, you could be having a little bit of a conversation with your neighbor about what's being said, or you have those sidebar conversations. Whereas you're on Zoom, you're not allowed to say anything, but you have to also be very much sort of concentrating like we are now, sort of thing. It's like, because you're on show, and it feels like you're almost like more exposed to a certain extent, and it's a different dynamic, isn't it? So well, Kyle, thank you very much for making the time. It's fascinating discussion as ever, and I really appreciate it. So thanks very much.
No problem. It's been an honor, Chris, and I'll